Day 1. The storm. I know what you're expecting. You're probably thinking about some kind of hellfire storm of biblical proportions. No. Hell came in such a way that none of you reading this could possibly imagine. Officially, this never happened. But you must know the truth. First off, my name is Ryan Glasgow, and these events I'm about to retell happened nearly 8 years ago. I lived in a small town in northwestern Montana called Libby. The scenery was everything you could want from a town situated in the Rockies. There was a beautiful mountain terrain with lush pine forest and winding rivers and streams all across the surrounding area. My father had moved back to Libby after serving in the US Army for a decade. He had met my mother when he was in college at Penn State University, and she was more than happy to come back to his childhood home with him. Before I was born, he and my mother opened a local grocery store as a family business. But my father was more often than not away at his construction job in Kalispell, about an hour and a half away. He was a man who believed in becoming financially sound before having any children. When my parents were in their early 30s, I was born as the eldest of 3 children. 2 years afterwards, my mother gave birth to twins, my brother Graham and sister Cynthia. We were always a happy family, content with our way of life. My father's construction supervision job always supplemented us with a healthy amount of disposable income, most of which they would put into savings. It wasn't until January 17, 2011 that our lives would forever be changed. It was on that morning I woke up to begrudgingly prepare myself for another humdrum day of school. I moseyed to the bathroom directly across the hall from my room to take my shower for the day. I contemplated how my calculus class might put me to sleep that day as I toweled myself dry and put on my jeans and long-sleeve t-shirt. My morning routine summoned me to the kitchen where I toasted and buttered a bagel for my morning sustenance. Walking into the living room, I noticed my father and mother each watching the local news while drinking their morning cup of coffee. It was rather strange that they were still home 7:45, which happened to be only 15 minutes before the grocery store was due to be opened. My father had his eyes focused so intently on the TV that I was surprised there wasn't a hole burnt into the screen by his gaze. I wondered what could have him so interested in the news. Nothing interesting ever happened in Libby, so I decided to take a seat on the couch and watch with my parents. The meteorologist on screen was dressed in a neat all-black suit with a white undershirt. His slicked back hair shimmered in the lights, revealing that he had likely used too much hair gel in preparation for his morning. Finally, I actually paid enough attention to hear him say, "So, only travel in an emergency. All businesses and schools in the northwestern region of the state are advised to be closed down until the storm passes." "What's he talking about, Dad?" I asked my father curiously. He blew softly on his still steaming coffee and took a sip before answering. "Just take a look outside, son." I drew back the curtains, to be met with what I can only describe as pure white. Nothing beyond the window was visible, unless you wanted to view the copious amount of snow falling from the sky. There was plenty of that to see. What the meteorologist had said now took full effect in my mind. No school? Fantastic. I knew what I was going to spend my day doing. I sprinted down to our basement to already see the TV and spare heater on. When I saw the screen displaying the wonderful and cruel but hilarious world of South Park, I knew it was my 16-year-old brother Graham that was already up. This made my chances of what I now had planned for the day skyrocket. "Hey Graham," I said as I entered the room. He whirled around on the couch, his steely blue eyes that we all shared as a family looking at me startled, yet happy to see me at the same time. Graham knew what time it was. Ever since our favorite game for the Xbox 360 came out in the fall of 2010, we had made it our tradition to play it whenever we had a day off of school. "Took you long enough," Graham teased. "Is it time?" I asked him excitedly. "Hell yeah," I've had the thing booted up for about 15 minutes waiting for you to finally come down here," Graham replied as he swiped the TV remote from the coffee table. I watched as he flipped through the inputs until it finally got to the Xbox 360's home screen and tapped the A button on his controller to start up the game. The loading screens graced our ears with some of the marvelous musical compositions of Martin O'Donnell as we eagerly awaited the title screen. After about another minute of waiting, a title screen reading Halo Reach appeared on the TV. We decided to play through the in-game campaign on legendary difficulty for some fun but rage-inducing gameplay. As the countdown began, we heard the front door upstairs slam shut. I thought nothing of it at the time, because I was now enthralled with the Halo universe for what seemed like the umpteenth time in my life. We pushed about halfway through the in-game campaign when the power finally went out. Naturally, my brother and I became pretty pissed over having our fun cut short. The basement began to grow cold as the frigid temperature from outside our house crept in. Graham was the first of us to dash upstairs. He was always impatient when things went south. As I climbed my way to the top of the stairs, I overheard my mother and Cynthia talking in the kitchen. "You can't be serious! Dad actually went out?" Cynthia screamed worriedly. "Dad's gonna be fine. He was in the army for 10 years, so he would know a thing or two about surviving out there. Besides, you should be grateful that he did go. He's getting extra supplies from the store for us to make it through this." My mom replied soothingly as she started to stroke my sister's long curly blonde hair. "I hope he makes it back before we get snowed in," I said, reaching the top of the stairs. It seemed as if my statement had become law as we heard the loud engine of my father's SUV once it pulled into the driveway. Graham must have heard it too. He raced past us and bolted out the door to help my father carry in supplies. My mother, Cynthia, and I quickly followed suit to finish the job as fast as possible. 15 long, freezing minutes later, our entire kitchen was filled to the brim with food, toiletries, and other miscellaneous supplies we would need to survive the next few days. We weren't done yet. My father told us to take everything we could carry to the basement with us. He walked towards the bedroom, presumably to snatch up extra blankets to keep us warm and pillows to make sleeping in that room more comfortable. My mother carefully descended the shadowy staircase first, followed by Graham, then Cynthia and myself bringing up the rear. She ambled to the middle of the dark room in front of the now dead TV screen, which had been filled with my brother and I spilling Covenant blood only an hour earlier. What our mother did next, none of us could have possibly understood at the time. She set the supplies she had carried down to the basement aside and knelt down in front of the orange oval rug that sat neatly in front of the TV and pulled it away to reveal a large steel trapdoor I had only seen a couple times before. I had seen my mother and father take the plunge to do God knows what down there. She opened the trapdoor to reveal what looked like the entrance to a bunker lit by dim red lights. How could these lights be on? It was impossible. Unless my father had stowed some sort of generator in this bunker. But why would we need a bunker? I understood that my father was a military man, but something wasn't adding up. There had to be a reason. It's not like people would try to loot our house. Our town was too small for that. Whatever the reason may be, I was happy that we at least had some kind of failsafe in case of emergency. "Ryan, could you go down first? We'll drop everything that won't break down to you," my mother asked me with a tone so sweet I could do nothing but obey. The descent was easily a solid 10 to 15 feet down. I called up to my family once I had reached the bottom. The response was dropping down various food items, which I would quickly place in the vast space on either side of me. This room was large. Too large. Again, something seemed very off. My father's heavy footsteps grew louder as he entered the room above with a mass of blankets and pillows. He threw some down to me, while giving some to my mother and siblings as well as taking the remainder of the mass of bedding down himself. With everyone assembled in the spacious room, my father flipped the switch and more of the same dim red lights that guided our way to this room flickered to life. He climbed back up the ladder to the top and shut the trapdoor with a resounding thud. After which, various locks clicked into place. he was keeping us locked in here. After a few hours of explaining the various floors and amenities offered by the bunker and why I was here, I was finally satisfied with my new living quarters. In the back left corner of the room sat a computer that appeared to show many security cameras placed throughout the house upstairs and in the basement above us. As far as I could see, we were completely snowed in, no way in or out of the house. However, we could still see outside from the rooftop camera that only showed the immense snowfall for now. The nagging questions persisted in my mind. Why is all of this here? What could we need it for? The answer to those questions would have to wait. My father instructed us to take everything we had brought down here with us further down to what he called Sub-Level 2. Sub-Level 2 was where essentially an exact replica of our house on the surface resided. Every minor detail was perfectly replicated. How could my parents afford all of this? There had to be some explanation, but I was content on going to my new room and making myself comfortable to enter slumber. When I walked into my room, there was another computer with the same displays as the one on Sub-Level 1. I noticed that the time now read 7:28 p.m. Another peculiarity was that the screen computer monitor read audio on. All I could hear was the utter silence outside and the occasional gust of wind. I checked the rooftop camera and could faintly see what looked like a few people dressed in heavy winter gear wandering our street. They looked like they were on a mission. About 2 blocks from our house was an Albertson grocery store, not the store my parents owned. These people were probably on their way to loot it for supplies to last them the rest of the way through the storm. I had to commend them for their courage. It takes guts to put your life on the line, even if you have no other choice. The camera's view became obstructed when a massive gust of wind blew. Snow completely covered the feed on the camera's monitor. There went my entertainment. Without anything else to do, I did the only other thing that made sense. I went to my bed to enjoy slumber's sweet embrace. But before I was completely out for the night, I could have sworn I heard people's blood-curdling screams from the computer speakers. I thought it was just my mind welcoming me to dreamland. So I thought nothing of it. Finally, I drifted off. Day 2. Demons. Now, what kind of hell story would be complete without demons? Certainly not the one I'm telling you guys right now. I'll warn you, these things are creatures you never want to find yourself face to face with. These malevolent beings will haunt my dreams for the rest of my days. Our first full day of being snowed in began with me waking up at around 9 a.m. I remembered the screams of terror I thought I heard the night before. The sun was finally out, burning brightly in the sky, yet doing nothing to melt the ungodly portion of snow dumped on our town the day before. Surprisingly, the rooftop camera was still functional. Thank God for a backup generator. If we didn't have that, we'd be in the same position as the rest of the town, utterly without electricity. My father said the generator had enough power to last us for about 2 weeks, 3 if we were frugal with its usage. It was disconcerting to know how prepared he was for this situation, almost as if he had lived through something like this in the past. When I had the view of our rooftop camera, I could see the snow beautifully glistening in the sunlight like diamonds. What I saw in our street made me want to vomit, made me wish my dad had never put up those cameras. The people I had seen the night before were horrifically mutilated. Blood stained the snow around what were formerly several human bodies. I couldn't tell how many there were originally because the bodies all looked like they had been through a paper shredder and then a blender afterwards for a good measure. bloody paste and splintered bones littered the street outside the house. The winter coats these poor souls had worn were now in nothing but tatters. Whatever did this, I didn't want to find out. Was this why my parents had built a multi-level bunker under our home? Did they know more than they were letting on? I thought for sure they knew something, but I had no way of proving it. I was about to find my father when I heard it. I knew that sound. The only sound it could be was something digging through hardly packed snow. Whatever it was digging at the snow surrounding our house frantically. Was it an animal, or was someone looking for survivors? I put in a command for the rooftop camera to tilt forward to take a look at what was digging. What I saw made me jump from my chair and almost made my heart jump out of my chest. This was the first of many different demons I would see that day. Standing directly above the front door to our house, clawing away at the densely packed snow, was a being I had only read about online or heard about in stories from local Native Americans. An emaciated body so pale it almost blended in perfectly with the surrounding white backdrop. A human-shaped head, horrid, rotting antlers, and long clawed fingers were this monstrosity's grotesque characteristics. I now had my answers as what had ground my fellow man outside into a human Bloody Mary. A Wendigo. So, the old myth about them coming with the most violent of snowstorms was true. Its disgusting, labored breathing filled the speakers. It eventually hit snow so densely packed it couldn't break through no matter how hard it tried. This angered the beast so greatly that it let out an ear-splitting shriek of rage. However, it was not deterred from its ultimate goal of getting into our house. I watched as it continued to claw furiously at the snow until I heard something snap. The Wendigo had broken its wrist and let out a shriek even greater than the one previous. So loud in fact I could hear its echo from all the way from outside the house without need of the computer audio's assistance. Once again, undeterred, it soldiered on through its mission of bloodlust. At this point I knew I had to find my dad. Maybe he would know what to do. Maybe his army experience would come in handy. I rushed out of my room to find my dad getting ready to head up to sub-level 1. Something strange was going on. Even stranger than having a colossal emergency bunker under our house strange. He was dressed in a full uniform. Obviously army, but not any army uniform I'd ever seen before. His ensemble included full black body armor, a helmet with a black visor tinted dark enough that it was impossible to see his face beneath it, and a P90 as his weapon of choice. He looked like an ODST, or Orbital Drop Shock Trooper, from the Halo games if you really want to picture it in your head. There was a strange insignia on his armor's chest plate over his heart. It looked like a bright silver letter V encircled by a red oval. I had no idea what that meant, but it clearly meant that he had been in a kind of special forces while in the army. My giant of a father turned to me and took off his helmet, revealing his battle-scarred face. "You saw it too, didn't you, son?" he asked me calmly. "Yeah," was all I could fearfully muster up the will to say. In response, my father put his large right hand on my shoulder and gave it a nice pat. "I've dealt with these things before. They're truly nasty bastards." "What do you mean? You're not going up there, are you?" "Someone's gotta keep us safe, son," my father said solemnly as he started up the ladder. I tugged at his shoulder as I would have done when I was 5 years old, not wanting him to leave for work in the morning. "Look, Dad, if you're going up there, you're not going alone. I'm coming with you." My father continued his recent streak of acting strangely and cracked a smile whilst letting out a chuckle. "I've always wondered when you joined the family business, Ryan. This really isn't the way I wanted you to find out about it though. But I'm still proud. Come down to the 3rd floor with me. We need to get you prepped, my boy." I did as my father said. The rest of our family were still holed up in their rooms, doing who knows what. Surely they have to have heard something. Or maybe they were in too much fear to move. We descended the ladder at the end of a narrow hallway leading out of the living room to find ourselves in a brightly lit room full of military equipment, weapons, uniforms, and more. My mouth was agape in awe of the spectacle I was beholding. Yet another computer sat in the center of the room, now showing that another 4 Wendigos had joined their comrade in the pursuit of human flesh. They were making quick work of the snow barrier that protected our home, working in perfect unison, shoveling away our first line of defense. My father had a uniform identical to his for me to put on. After I adorned myself with my new garb, my dad led me to the weapons rack from which I took a flamethrower, much to his delight. Then, we heard it through the camera audio. The splintering of wood. The Wendigos were now in our house and rushing to the basement in competition to see which one of them would have the chance to sink their teeth and claws into us first. Luckily, the narrow hallways slowed them down, as they proved to be too small for their white antlers to fit through without turning sideways. But one of the more ambitious monsters thrust itself through, breaking off both antlers and causing it to let loose a scream of agony. We raced up to sub-level 1. It now stood directly under the trapdoor that the beasts were now pounding on relentlessly to no avail. Whoever constructed the steel door did a fantastic job. It budged not once, no matter how hard the Wendigo seemed to pound on it. My father walked over to a keypad next to the door and typed in the 4-digit code, which allowed the door to slide back, unveiling a layer of metal grit. It would be just big enough for the barrel of my flamethrower to fit through to burn the pale bastards to death. With some hesitation, I finally worked up enough false courage to begin the ascent to meet the beasts. When I reached the 4th rung from the top, I poked the barrel of my flamethrower through the hole and pulled the trigger. Every Wendigo above shrieked in pain, creating a cacophony of agony. Normally, I would hate the sound, but this was like music to my ears. I was making those that threatened my home and family pay dearly for their transgression. My father motioned me to come down from the ladder so he could go up. What would a P90 do to a Wendigo? Unless it had silver bullets for ammunition. My father quickly climbed up to the same rung I had been on moments earlier, P90 in hand, to finish them off. He fired off a single round, but what came out was not a bullet. Rather, it was a small beam of bright white light that disintegrated one of the Wendigos on impact. He dispatched of the others without a problem, leaving not a single trace of their former physical being to be found. When the beasts were defeated, the trapdoor sealed up once again, and it felt as if the oppressive atmosphere that had been hanging in the air since yesterday lifted somewhat. My father climbed down the ladder and placed his hand firmly on my shoulder again. "Good job, son," he congratulated. "You'll make a fine soldier." "Thanks, Dad," I replied shakily. I felt adrenaline coursing through my veins still, but I hoped I'd never have to face anything like that again. I could feel the evil that they exuded. It felt as if they were evil for the sake of being evil. We went back to monitoring the cameras outside the house. More Wendigos and other demons stalked the street outside. The hole where the demons had broken in caved in when the snow gave way. All manner of other hellspawn roamed the streets. Many looked like humanoid versions of animals and your stereotypical depictions of demons. Wendigos would be by far the least dangerous of this influx of monsters. We returned to sub-level 2 to make sure the rest of the family was alright. My mother was wearing one of the same suits that my father had put on earlier. Graham and Cynthia were still in their normal clothes, and it appeared that they were just as frightened as I was, but had no grasp on the situation at hand. What exactly was it that my father had done in the army? Someone needed to do some explaining. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded of my mother. She was clearly taken aback at this due to the expression of shock from my outburst. This expression was replaced by one that carried such a serious weight that I could almost feel it weighing me down physically. "Ryan, you have every right to know. You all do. she said, gesturing me both and my siblings, who were still too frightened to ask. This isn't the first time that this has happened. 20 years ago, another portal from hell opened in Russia, but they were able to close it before this stage. If we survive, you all have to remember that the first sign is a violent snowstorm. Not the first time? Graham repeated and asked simultaneously. Throughout humanity's history, events like this have happened, but the closeness in time is increasing. Eventually, the winters will be worldwide and never end, even though the Vikings of Norse legends were never considered the brightest. They did get one thing right. They predicted this. They called it Ragnarok. My mother answered. My head was spinning. I had heard of Ragnarok when we studied Norse mythology my sophomore year of high school, but I never believed it could be true. The end of the world. Maybe this was just the first stage and there was still a chance of us stopping it. Cynthia spoke next. What are we gonna do? It's not like we can take on those things. My father's voice sounded worried when he came up with an answer. We can't do it ourselves, but I do know some people who can help. He pulled a small circular device out of his breast pocket and tapped a button in the center and then typed in what seemed to be a series of numbers. Was this some kind of phone? I went with yes once someone answered on the other line. They spoke in a strange language I had never heard before. It sounded otherworldly. As in, I can't even describe what it sounded like. It was obviously not human in origin. My father responded in kind, speaking in that strange language. The one single word I could make out was Glasgow, our family name. Maybe this was an old military contact, but did that mean our US military had been in league with aliens or some other creatures that we didn't know about? My father replaced the device in his breast pocket inside. I got good news and bad news. Good news first, Cynthia said impatiently. They can send help. Cynthia cut him off. Great! How long till they get here? You didn't let me finish. And that's the bad news. We're on our own for 2 days. They won't make it here any sooner, so we'll have to hold out until then. My father replied as he slumped down into the chair directly behind him, hung his head and clasped his hands together. His face wore a look of defeat. I had never seen this man, who I always viewed as someone who could never waver in his optimism, crumble like that. This was the most frightening part of being trapped on the ground, not the incredible amount of snow or demons, but my father looking so crushed. After we all tried consoling him for what seemed like hours, he finally cheered up enough to take a stand. I decided it was time to survey the cameras again. The rooftop camera became my personal favorite, as it showed the most of what was going on outside. It was almost like watching a nature documentary about hell, its food chain, and the demons that called it home. I'm sure you're curious about what different types of demons we had prowling the town, so I'll give you guys a few examples. As I told you before, the lesser demons like wendigos, skinwalkers, werewolves, and vampires were at the bottom of the food chain as far as demons were concerned. The pattern I noticed was that the older the demons were in mythology, the more power they were granted. The mid-level demons, which are the most abundant, included but weren't limited to those found in Greek, Roman, or Egyptian myths. Minotaurs, cyclops, ogres, giants, sphinxes, even dragons. You should have somewhat of an understanding by now. The monsters mentioned above were easy prey for the older, more powerful demons, but that doesn't mean that they leave humans off of their menu, or like a delicacy to them, as they rarely get the chance to enter our world to devour us. The mid-level freaks strutted around like they owned the place, but cowered in fear when the archfiends, the pinnacle of power across all planes of existence, made their presence known. Archfiends are the fewest in number, but they more than make up for it with their destructive power. However, that is not their most terrifying aspect. Unlike other demons previously mentioned, They are capable of a level of intellect that other creatures, including us, can only dream of attaining. If you ever catch a glimpse of an archfiend, it's already too late. I'll give you guys a description, so you can picture it without having to see the real thing. I promise, you don't want to. Archfiends have the ability to shapeshift, but their true form is generally the same for all of them. Typically, they stand 12 to 20 feet tall and are extremely muscular. Their heads often resemble bone with gleaming red eyes and have large jet black horns protruding from each side of their skull. The archfiends' body often are made of bone on the outside, like an exoskeleton, and have large bat-like wings jutting out from their backs, giant hands whose fingers end in razor-sharp claws, and feet with large talons like those of an eagle or hawk. In the distance, through the camera, I saw my first archfiend that day. It struck a chord of fear that I had never felt before or after since my first viewing of that beast. That chord was struck because he stared right back into the camera and into my soul. He knew I was watching him, pissing myself out of fright. But the look he gave me was not one of rage or malevolence, but one of mercy and sympathy. Perhaps the archfiend could sense my emotions and pitied me for having to go through this ordeal. Looking in his glowing red eyes through the camera, I could feel that he meant no harm to us, that he was basking in the glory of finally being free of hell. That night, before I went to bed, I watched the archfiend stride to a place nearly 2 blocks from our house and sit down on a throne of rubble from the homes the other lesser demons had destroyed. He helped himself to a couple of fleeing wendigos for a snack he took great delight in. He savored every bite, every crunch the wendigo's bones made as he chewed. A circle of red clouds began forming in the night sky above the center of town. What that could mean, I didn't even want to guess. Just more nightmare fuel, before I would eventually fall asleep for the night. Day 3. Preparation for war. Sorry, I haven't continued recounting my experience in a while. I've been busy with things I can't talk about on here. What I can say though is that things have been getting weird again. And it's not good. Day 3 of this hell began when I woke up around 6 AM. The events of the previous day left me with a restless sleep. Demons haunted my dreams, tempted me to come outside to visit them even. However, one of these demons that stalked my dreams was not one that had ill intent towards me. In fact, he seemed to take a liking to me. Whether it was my curiosity or that my family and I had survived the initial invasion, I don't know. This dream told me what I needed to do once I fully recovered its contents from the archives of my mind. He first entered my dream as a disembodied voice. I was sitting alone on a bench at one of our town's parks on a warm sunny day, which was in stark contrast to the current reality. A small wooded area was at the center of the park and seemed to be the origin of the voice. The deep, husky voice beckons me to come closer to the forest edge, and I obeyed as if I were in some sort of trance. When I reached the edge of the forest, the voice continued to direct me towards the center, where I was faced with the great demon himself. Massive and robust, he towered over me at a height of what must have been at least 20 feet. This was the archfiend I had seen the day prior, eating wendigos as if they were an appetizer at a grand buffet. Upon seeing me, he shrank down to a height that put him directly at eye level with me. Emotions I could not understand swirled in his blazing pupilless red eyes. Even though he was now my exact height, the great archfiend's appearance remained menacing. The demon extended one of his large clawed hands for me to shake it, and I did so as not to offend the beast. His voice spoke deep and husky like before.
Allow me to introduce myself, human. I am Legion, firstborn and king of archfiends. I have been watching you since your birth. You shall become a worthy ally, just as your father and those before him have been.
I could feel myself shaking, not just my body and my dream, but my very soul. What did this mean? My father? An ally of a demon?
Am I correct in assuming you are terrified? If I am, that is of no importance. I have come to deliver a warning, human. An evil more ancient than I will be descending upon this world soon. I can assist you in combating this evil, but you must tell me that I have your trust.
Legion continued. You have my trust, I stammered weakly. A look of malcontent crossed Legion's bony face.
You will say it with conviction, human. You are toying with forces you cannot yet comprehend. To create this unbreakable bond, you must be certain in your heart, mind, and soul that you can follow through. Decide.
At this, a smile crossed Legion's face. In a ring of brilliant white light surrounded us where we stood and grew closer until it couldn't move without touching one of us. An intense beam of light shot up, enveloping both of us within it.
It is done. We shall meet in the real world tomorrow,
Legion announced as he spread his bat-like wings to fly up into the sky and out of my mind. I wanted to deny that the dream would have any true impact on me or my life. But I knew that things wouldn't play out that way. I would be meeting Legion in some capacity today. I prayed to God that he wouldn't harm us in any way. I left my room after putting on my uniform that resembles one of the ODST. When I climbed the ladder up to sub-level 1, I saw my mother, brother and sister being escorted into a circular purple portal which stood about 7 feet tall by other men wearing uniforms that matched mine. They were leaving, and I wouldn't even get to say goodbye. Yet, I would have a modicum of happiness knowing they would be safe from the impending doom that awaited us outside. I searched for my father and found him speaking with Legion. Obviously, they had some history together, like Legion had mentioned in my dream encounter with him. Legion was again downsized to be my father's height. I was beginning to think that this was his way of showing respect. They were in deep discussion, like two old Marines recollecting old war stories. Looking back, that's exactly what they were doing. My father said something inaudible to me, to which Legion let out a hearty guffaw. When I walked up and tapped my father on the shoulder, he whipped around and gave me a hug. He wasn't the one that often gave hugs, so when he would, I always felt a special kind of warmth. I thought you said you wouldn't be here until tomorrow, I said to my father, while gesturing to the many soldiers doing various tasks around us. I know, but once I explained how dire our situation had become, Command had no choice but besides immediate deployment. My father responded professionally. I took a good look around. There had to be at least 50 or more soldiers on this floor alone, and I knew full and well there had to be many more on the levels below. Some of the soldiers were men, but others were not. They weren't demons either. Where had they come from? As I asked myself this, two alien-looking creatures stepped forth. Strangely, they looked a lot like animals you'd find here on Earth. This one on the left looked reptilian, like a giant bipedal lizard with white eyes that had no pupils and jet black scales covered the exposed parts of his body. The second soldier wore a black beret and somewhat resembled a lobster with white mustache. Both of them sported the same uniforms as the rest of us, save for Legion, who did not have or have the need for one. Who are they? I asked my father.
They are warriors that hail from other worlds from across the universe,
Legion answered as they both reported to someone that looked like their commanding officer and jumped down the ladder to sub-level 2. You might have guessed this by now, but this isn't just a fallout bunker, Ryan. This is an entire base. My father chimed in as he led us to a massive monitor showing over 20 different sub-levels below this one with various labels, including the armory below the end of the hallway. This is everything we have to offer here, Legion. Make yourself at home if you need a rest. We built this here because we were able to pinpoint where the next breach would occur.
Impeccable as always, my friend.
Legion congratulated my father. You seem tense, more than usual. What's wrong? My father asked in a tone of empathy.
The red clouds that plague the sky. They worry me. Only once in my eons of life have I seen them. And it was not long ago. The Eater of Worlds descended from it and laid waste to this place. He is coming once again. My other archfiends have pledged their support in ridding our dimension of this scourge. However, no matter how many we number, we will not have the sufficient power to defeat this evil of evils. We must perform a sacrificial ritual to summon the ancient gods to assist us in preventing Ragnarok.
Legion stated coldly. What should we sacrifice? I asked.
Why else do you believe that I summoned the lesser demons such as those you call Wendigos? They are the sacrificial lambs, and that pleases me. I do not care for them as nutrition or as fellow demons. This will be my way of purging the lesser demons from our ranks, as well as summoning the ancients.
Legion answered gleefully. He placed his massive hand on my shoulder, and I winced. Its weight was tremendous, even if he was just resting it. Still though, I was glad to have the archfiends on our side. Whatever, or whoever this Eater of World was, it couldn't be good. How had he been defeated before? The ancient gods? Perhaps those of the Norse, Greek and Egyptian mythologies? Who could know, except for Legion? Please, invite your archfiends in. I know how they hate having to share space with demons under them. My father told Legion as he left to take care of other business. Legion's devilish black horns emitted a glow, and 20 or so other archfiends materialized in the room in front of us. They all had a similar appearance to their king, but were far less impressive. Legion gave them the rundown on what was happening, and they reveled in an opportunity for war. As Legion would later tell me, it was not the archfiend's duty to prey on innocent humans and souls, but to be the protectors of our dimension in the multiverse. They are far fewer in number than they once were, but immortality does not mean invulnerability, except in the case of Legion. He was created by God himself to rule over hell until the end of time.
Your father and I first met over 20 years ago, when we last breached the barrier between our worlds. It was but a test to see how adequate your defenses were in case of an event such as the one currently taking place. I took quite a liking to him, and we have kept in contact over these years. He is a man with moxie and cunning qualities I appreciate in any being, human, demon, or otherwise. You possess these traits as well, and they shall serve you well, son of Glasgow.
Legion told me later that day. This was the recreation of a bond that has transcended time, and it felt like getting to know an old friend after years of not seeing each other. The other archfiends were well acquainted with those working on base, and were very keen on getting to know me as well. I had thought of demons as inhuman monsters, or humans that would forsake being human to gain power. Although this is true in many cases, the archfiends are an exception. They are far more human than many of the people I've known before or after these events, and that includes those I'm close to. Previously, I had said something like, catching a glimpse of an archfiend means death. But that's only if you piss them off. Honestly, that's pretty hard to do, but that doesn't mean I recommend it. They like studying how every human is different from one another. It must be nice for them to know that beings without uniform traits and habits exist. Archfiends are not alone in this, and neither are we. I spent the rest of that day getting to know the newcomers to our bunker. They all had such interesting stories to tell. Perhaps I could try to get one of them to post what their worlds are like sometime. This wasn't your typical armed force. It was like a family I would need in the coming days. My actual family had gone into hiding to wait this out on another world. They were safe. Legion saw me staring into the monitor displaying the rooftop camera's view again, and watched with me. I was staring at the red clouds, which were now violently swirling, creating winds that devastated any building near them. Low-level demons scurried about, many fighting with each other over territory or food. As interesting as that was though, I couldn't keep my attention off of the clouds. Lightning began streaking in all directions from them, and eventually, a crimson portal opened within. Something was barely scratching the surface on the other side, but it was enough to notice. I looked at Legion for any explanation for what it was, and he said 3 words.
Ragnarok has begun.
Day 4. Ragnarok. I awoke to find Legion standing at the foot of my bed, staring at the computer monitor intently. The look he wore in his face told me something had gone seriously wrong. "What is it?" I asked the mighty archfiend groggily, rubbing my eyes with my fists.
It has begun. We performed our ritual last night to summon the gods. They should be arriving shortly. I hope they're not too late. He has already reached this place.
Legion replied in a defeated and broken tone. How on earth could the king of demons sound so helpless? The eater of worlds? I continued questioning.
You're correct. It is as the builders of the great pyramids of Egypt predicted. The great serpent has come to devour the sun and the world along with it.
Legion answered. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be able to believe that this could be possible. But the fact that I was sitting in a room with the king of demons, so anything was believable at this point. I had heard of the ancient Egyptian myth that Apophis would come from the depths of the underworld to swallow the sun and plunge the world into darkness and chaos. Surely enough, upon viewing the monitor, there was a massive crimson cobra stretching for miles across the sky. Another thing that had changed from the previous day was that the swirling vortex of red clouds had disappeared. I knew nothing good had been waiting on the other side of those clouds, but I never thought that Apophis was going to slither his way out of them. I should have known nothing good could have come from that. But forgive me for trying to be optimistic during the literal apocalypse. As the serpent began slithering outwards towards the sun, a radiant blast of white light showered the now derelict town. Out of it stepped many massive men and women. Some had animal heads on human bodies, and others were fully human and dressed in ancient-looking garb. However, one stood above the rest. He was beyond archaic. This man, or whatever he was, must have been eons old. He stroked his massive white beard as he surveyed the carnage at his feet. This man was missing his left eye. On that revelation, everything clicked into place. These were not ordinary beings. They were gods, but they were not alone. They brought with them what appeared to be an army of humans that were all manner of ethnicity. If you were a truly great warrior, he would really end up in Valhalla to come back to Earth for one final battle. Whether we liked it or not, we would be fighting this battle today. Winner takes all.
They have arrived. The Titans will not be far behind in an attempt to thwart us. We must go.
Legion commanded sternly. I followed him into the hallway where other soldiers were rushing upstairs to go outside into the fray. Legion stopped in what had been the living room only 2 days prior and spoke to his fellow archfiends in their native tongue, presumably to prepare them for what would be their final battle. I stormed into the armory with nearly a dozen fellow soldiers and began grabbing anything I could use to put down anything that was standing in our way. My father motioned for me to follow him into a secret room. Something was different about him today. It was almost as if he was too bulky for his body, which looked fit to burst if it were put under too much strain. I did as he wanted and followed him into the room. It was small inside and showcased many different Norse symbols and depictions of battle, mainly those that involved Thor. In the very center of the room was a massive hammer that no human or possibly demon could ever hope to lift, much less wield. Nevertheless, my father picked it up with ease, and his body transformed before my very eyes. No longer was his hair that clean crew cut I was used to seeing. No longer was his face clean shaven. No longer was his body lean. Before me stood a behemoth of a man who had long, flowing blonde hair and well-kept beard to match. His previous armor had been replaced with perfectly polished silver armor. His now deeper, huskier voice spoke softly to me. "I wish I had told you before today, my son, but your father, at least the one you are used to seeing, was a disguise, due to the fact that we have not technically met. I am Thor." My head was spinning. I didn't know what to think. I was the son of a god? Did my mother or anyone else in the family know about this? All I could think was to give him a hug, and he reciprocated. To this day, I will never understand why that's what I did in that moment. "Dad, why now?" I inquired mid-embrace, crying into his rock-hard shoulder. I couldn't until the time was right. I knew we would fight together on this day, and that's when I made the decision to wait until now, he said as we drifted away from each other. We re-entered the armory, where I finished gearing up for the war we were about to find ourselves in. My father confirmed that the name of his hammer is Mjolnir, when myself and many others asked him about it, for those of you wondering. Thor stood in front of the soldiers gathered on sub-level 1 to give a speech about what we would be doing and about dying in battle being the most honorable way to depart to the afterlife. We took our positions in a single file line and began racing up the ladder as soon as the hatch to the basement upstairs opened. Met with immediate resistance by some Wendigos that had decided to use our home as a refuge, we pushed through with ease, thanks to the archfiends being hungry enough to sink their teeth into anything. Eventually, we burst through the front door of my now destroyed home and began dispatching the lower level demons left and right. Only the vampires were smart enough not to be outside, but they would meet their fate all the same. Legion shouted something, and we all paused to stare up at the quickly darkening sky. Apophis was over halfway to the sun. We couldn't let him devour it, as it had been said he has done to countless other stars of other worlds. Some of the gods were already en route to intercept him, but they were met with fierce defiance by the Titans, who were being led by Prometheus, a being that wanted revenge on the Greek gods for imprisoning him for thousands of years. Lesser demons came to their aid, wanting every chance to overthrow the archfiends that had ruled over them since the beginning of time. My father, Thor, broke through the enemy line with a couple of the other gods along with Legion and the archfiends. I was faced with a skinwalker that tried to swipe at me viciously and swiftly. I wanted to call for help, but the others were occupied with bigger threats. I bobbed and weaved like Muhammad Ali, stepping backwards into a house that was barely being held up by its supports. The demon glowered at me with its spiteful eyes as it continued to slash at me. I kept dodging, not wanting to be on the receiving end of one of its blows. Although the skinwalkers are relatively weak by demon standards, they will still easily mutilate you or me. The beast grew even more furious at his inability to land a hit in its blind rage. It struck one of the few supports holding the house up. I somersaulted out of a missing wall before the home collapsed on top of the skinwalker. Thinking it was over, I turned my back, only to hear a screech of pure agony from the rubble. Something told me we were just getting started. Something told me we were just getting started. A pale hand burst through the debris, and the rest of the mess that was the creature's body followed suit. I stood there for a moment before I shot it with the beam rifle I took from the armory, and the demon disintegrated into a pile of ash and dust. I turned to see Prometheus and Zeus, the Greek god of the sky, preparing for hand-to-hand combat. It was time I left the area, and many of my fellow humans had the same idea. We didn't think it would be a good idea to stand at ground zero of a battle of divine proportions. Zeus landed the first punch, which shook the very earth around us and sent a shockwave that destroyed some of the surrounding buildings. Prometheus was pushed backwards on his heels and readied himself to defend the next attack. I stared up into the sky to see my father, along with Odin, his father, and the archfiends, who were only a minor annoyance for Apophis, who shielded the sun's glow when he coiled up in a defensive maneuver. The temperature dropped drastically with the sun blocked, and Apophis's other allies drew in more storm clouds to conjure another blizzard. Without light, we would be easy pickings for the lesser demons, and with the gods and archfiends occupied, I didn't like our chances. We had to do something drastic, and I wasn't sure the others were up for it. No matter if they wanted to or not, it was do or die for not just us, but for our world. I wasn't sure if I inherited some godly strength from my father or not, and now wasn't the time to test that out. I sprinted over to another soldier that held a sniper rifle version of my beam rifle, and I pointed at the strange ghost-like demons bringing in the storm clouds. After telling him to kill them, he told me he wasn't sure he had enough ammunition, and the rest of his squad had been wiped out by a giant earlier in the battle. He let me know he couldn't do it without cover fire, but I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and shouted that if we didn't, we would all end up like his comrades. I said I would give him cover fire until he exterminated the weather demons. During our bombardment of the demons, and that he had a family that was murdered by some of these same demons. This was his reason for enlisting in this army, to avenge his loved ones. Roger said it wasn't any demon we had seen so far. He was adamant that it was one of a kind. We were rushed by some of the lower class demons, which, I'll reiterate, are the ones humans can become. I gunned them down swiftly and without mercy. A massive cyclops began moseying its way towards us. It would definitely take more than a few rounds to drop this one. "Roger, how many more?" I shouted over the hail of our gunfire and earth-shaking punches and kicks thrown by gods. "I've got 3 down, 2 to go," he yelled back. "What's the situation on your end?" "How about a big-ass cyclops on our 6? I roared as the cyclops came within a few hundred yards of us, giant club in hand. Roger didn't bother to turn around. He knew if our end was now, then so be it. I didn't like that. It was time to save us both. The grenade I'd been holding in my palm wasn't something I was hoping I had to use, but I had no choice. We were out of options. I steered down the Cyclops. Apparently, it wasn't well liked where it came from, as a Wendigo leaped out and tried in vain to gouge out the beast's eye. The much smaller demon would pay dearly for its transgression, when the Cyclops batted it away with his club and out of sight. Now undeterred, it continued on its beeline for us ever so slowly. As the looming figure grew closer, Roger eradicated the weather demons and turned to face the Cyclops. He knew as well as I did that our only hope was the grenade after he used his last shot on an incoming werewolf that would have blindsided me and certainly killed me. We waited until it was about 50 yards out before I threw the damn thing. Roger pulled me down behind the busted wall of the old post office and we ducked for cover. The sound of the explosion was enough to make our ears ring even though we had them covered. After this, the overwhelming presence the demons had seemed to evaporate. We would still find the occasional beast bold enough to rush us, but the streets soon fell silent. So silent we could hear the wind, and faintly the battle in the sky. Apophis was weakening without his armies of demons at his command. I watched Thor nearly bash the cobra's head in with a lightning-charged Mjolnir, causing the great serpent to let out an ear-splitting hiss. The thunder that followed was even more so. Prometheus with the other titans were still holding their own, but were making little overall difference without their foot soldiers to back them up. The white light from before returned in a faint glow and disappeared again. This had to be another sign that the serpent was beginning to fail. However, he still held the upper hand even with dozens of gods attacking him at once. Odin saw it fit for himself to leave the battle and come down to meet me. At the sight of this, Roger fled to join another group to finish off the demons. He towered over me and shrank down to accommodate our height difference, just as Legion had before. Although we were now the same height, I still felt minuscule in his divine presence. When he put his hand on my shoulder, I could feel the weight of the knowledge he had gained since time began. He stroked his long white beard. "You have done well, my grandson. It is time you join us in the brawl above." His voice boomed so loudly, I was sure the entire world could hear him. "I will lend you some of my own strength. I trust you will use it wisely. I will, but what am I supposed to? You know what needs to be done. You have come so far already, Odin said as he enveloped me with a golden light. I felt untold power well up within me. Knowledge I could only dream of was at my fingertips. I thought this is what it must be like to be a god, or part of it anyways. My body began to levitate off of the ground, and before I knew it, I was flying in the sky with gods. Odin rose into the sky and joined me. He simply nodded his head, and I slammed into Apophis with all my newfound might. However, it was not enough to do any damage, but I tried repeatedly and struck the same spot over and over again. The other gods were severely weakening the Great Snake. Legion and the Archfiends were ripping scales away from the serpent's body, causing it to hiss in anguish. The Demon King stopped to give me an approving look and resumed his onslaught. Again, the white light returned faintly, but this time, it didn't vanish. It only grew stronger and brighter as Apophis grew weaker. The feeling of his strength ebbing away was nearly tangible. The vortex of swirling red clouds returned, lightning streaking everywhere, threatening to strike us. Apophis's weakened body couldn't resist the pull of the vortex and started to be pulled in. Seeing this, the Greek gods flung the severely weakened titans into the massive cobra, hastening his exit into whatever wretched place he calls home. We took this moment to revel in our accomplishment. Thor asked my grandfather if he could remain here on Earth with his family. Reluctantly, not wanting to see his son leave again, Odin said yes. I was overjoyed that my father didn't have to go back to Asgard, but still sad for my grandfather. The hardest goodbye was to Legion. He had to return to governing hell for eternity, but said we would keep in touch if anything happened. The other Archfiends promised to do their best to keep their lesser demons out of our world, and to let them know if anyone stepped out of line. Legion shook hands with my father and me before leading the remainder of Hell's residents back home. His parting words stick with me, even today.
This shall not be the last time we meet. I implore you to keep contact with me, my young friend. Tell me if you need me.
I still hold true on that now. Legion and I usually talk once a month and let each other know about anything new happening in Hell or on Earth. Sometimes I feel sorry for him. A being created by the God that those of you Christians worship specifically to watch over Hell for eternity. However, Legion seems perfectly content with his occupation as long as he gets to visit me and my family every now and again. Strangely, the only reference I could find for anyone similar to Legion in the Bible, for those of you wanting to know, is the one of Christ's miracles when he exorcised Legion. When I asked the Legion about it, he said it was a lesser demon that was named by its parents after him, and that he remembers obliterating the offender for his transgression. Remember that Archfiends rarely come to Earth. They only show up in times of great war or crisis, and to visit friends outside of Hell every few years. The rest of my family came back from the other world they were staying on during Ragnarok, and the other soldiers not native to Earth returned to their own worlds. Graham nearly fainted when he found out that Thor was our dad, and Cynthia now has a lot more appreciation for him. We started rebuilding as soon as the winter was over. The FBI and CIA had some hard work covering up all this, and helped run the rebuild project of our humble town. However, they really couldn't clean up all of the evidence, so they did their best to hide it or come up with a somewhat reasonable explanation. Here I am, 8 years later, telling you this story. Whether you believe it or not isn't important. It's the truth. I bet some of you wonder why I waited so long to tell the world. That's because I wasn't going to originally. But today, I got a phone call from my father. At first, He brought up the incident from all those years ago. And when I asked why, he said, Ragnarok never truly ended. It has only entered the first phase.